Hello, Hossein. Hello? Hossein, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, tell me, did you read the lesson?
Yes.
Okay, and how did it go? Do you have any problems?
No. Thanks to the Zoom, it was easier.
Excuse me?
Thanks to the Zoom, it was easier.
Okay, very good. So everything we explained yesterday, was it clear?
Yes.
Good. Okay, we will continue from there. 1 minute. Fine, I'll share my screen. Just give me a second. Okay. How was studying for O level?
I'm solving خلاص. I was solving من 21st of April 20.
Did you study the supplements really well? Is everything clear?
Yes.
You will get a better grade this time?
إن شاء الله بس في مشكلة بس في الإكسكريشن.
I did a revision session in over excretion and I sent the recording. You did not,
Okay.
and you did
I'll
not
watch.
recording.
Okay, I'll watch.
So starts revision sessions also starting tomorrow. If you have any questions, ask me, but I want you to attend the record, to listen to the recording because I revised excretion from A to Z.
Okay. في revision lessons بكرة لإيه؟
Anything you want.
Okay. I'll attend them.
I'm going to start O-level revision. Okay?
Okay.
Now,
revision للمنهج كله ولا إيه؟ ولا إيه؟
the lessons that you have problems over.
Okay.
Okay. Now, where am I? We are in transport and mammals. Okay, we stopped at the oxygen dissociation curve. You remember. Now, the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood, is it now clear? Did you study the equation and you understand? You want me to revise it?
لا تمام.
Okay, so we will start from the oxygen dissociation curve. These curves and these graphs are very, very important. We have to make sure that we understand them very well. So we're here. Okay, now this oxygen dissociation curve, from the name, yeah, the oxygen dissociation curve. What does dissociation mean, Hussein? Dissociation means release, to break up. Okay, we have hemoglobin that combines with oxygen and it gives you oxyhemoglobin. Okay, Hussein?
Okay.
Fine. Now, we want to study, or this graph is showing you how well the hemoglobin will bind with oxygen. In other words, how well, or we will study the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. Affinity. Affinity means how well it will bind. Is this clear?
Clear.
What are the factors that will affect the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen? How well hemoglobin will bind to oxygen. So this graph, on the x-axis, you have the partial pressure of oxygen. In other words, the amount of oxygen found in arteries. And on the y-axis, you have the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. In other words, how much hemoglobin is bound to oxygen. So this is what the axis means. On the x-axis, the amount of oxygen in arteries, the partial pressure of oxygen is the amount of oxygen in arteries. And on the y-axis, the affinity of hemoglobin, how much of the hemoglobin is bound to the oxygen. Now the graph looks like this. This is my graph here. You have the partial pressure of oxygen on the x-axis. You need to know every single detail of the graph. And the percentage of hemoglobin saturation with oxygen. In other words, how much hemoglobin is bound to the oxygen. The graph looks like this. This is how the graph looks like. It's like an S. okay? We want to understand the graph. This graph, you can read it in so many ways. You can either read it from left to right, or from right to left, or you can divide the graph in half and read this upper part of the graph or the lower part of the graph. Okay, let's read the graph from left to right. Now, this is the easiest way to read the graph. If we read this graph from left to right, we will simply say that as the pressure of oxygen is increasing, as the partial pressure of oxygen is increasing, what is happening to the percentage saturation of hemoglobin?
Increasing.
It is also increasing. But can you describe the increase? Is this increase here in this part of the graph fast or slow?
Slow.
Yes, this part of the graph is slow. This is a very important keyword. So that part of the graph will say that as the partial pressure of the oxygen is increasing, there is an increase in the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, but that increase is very slow. Now the question is, why is it slow? Do you know why?
عشان البريشر مش عالي أو مفيش أكسجين كتير أو مش عالي.
You are correct. This is one reason. So why is it slow? For two reasons. Reason number one, because the affinity of hemoglobin with oxygen decreases as the partial pressure decreases. And because of the answer that you said, because you told me, because there is very little oxygen. So you're right. So here, the hemoglobin is binding with oxygen very slowly because oxygen is already very little. Are you convinced with the first reason?
Yes.
Yes. This is the reason you gave me, and it's correct. The second reason why binding of hemoglobin to oxygen is very slow is because hemoglobin finds it very difficult to bind to the first oxygen. Always binding to the first oxygen molecule is very difficult. This is the second reason, due to a structural reason in the hemoglobin itself. So, in this part of the graph, the hemoglobin binding to oxygen is very slow. Why? For two reasons. Reason number one is what?
في low oxygen low partial pressure. Partial oxygen
Yes,
pressure.
because the oxygen levels are very low. So the hemoglobin cannot find any oxygen to bind to. And the second reason, because binding to the first oxygen molecule is always very easy or very difficult.
Difficult.
Yes, it's difficult. So we are done with the first part of the graph. Now we will look at the second part of the graph, or in the center of the graph, this part. Okay, this part of the graph, as you can see, it is very steep. And this is explained in exactly this way. A small increase in the partial pressure of oxygen results in a great increase in the percentage of hemoglobin saturated with oxygen. A small increase in the partial pressure of oxygen greatly increases oxygen loading. Hemoglobin is picking up oxygen. Hemoglobin is taking oxygen, taking oxygen, taking oxygen. Now, why is that? Why here is the oxygen pickup very quick? Can you tell me why?
عشان it's already bonded to an oxygen في وقتها.
Because the partial pressure of oxygen is increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
Yes, because now there are more oxygen molecules, and more oxygen molecules are available to bind with the hydrogen, with the hemoglobin. Okay, this is one reason. What is the second reason? The second reason is that when the hemoglobin binds with the first oxygen molecule, there are changes that happen in the structure of the hemoglobin, making binding of the remaining oxygen molecules very easy. And this will indicate or be described as cooperative binding. You did not hear this before?
No, I didn't hear this before.
We said it in class, my dear. Hemoglobin, binding of the hemoglobin with the first oxygen molecule is not easy. When the hemoglobin binds with the first oxygen molecule, the hemoglobin changes in structure. This change in structure is called conformational change. It is called what?
Conformational change.
Yes, conformational change. After that change in the structure of hemoglobin, the binding of the remaining oxygen molecules becomes very easy. So this is reason number 2. And that is called cooperative binding, like very easy binding. The hemoglobin easily and quickly binds with the oxygen. And this is represented in the central part of the graph, this part of the graph. Okay, so this part of the graph here, it is described as follows. A small increase in the partial pressure of oxygen results in a great increase in the saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. In other words, in this part of the graph, the hemoglobin is being loading. It is picking up oxygen very quickly for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, because the partial pressure of oxygen is increasing. Now we have more or lots of oxygen available. And reason number 2, because after the first oxygen molecule, the structure of the hemoglobin changes, and that change in structure makes hemoglobin binding to the remaining oxygen molecules very easy, called cooperative binding. Okay?
Okay.
Is it understood? Understand it with me now and then study it later. Fine?
Understand now.
Good. Now, this part of the graph, the last part of the graph, how is it explained? An increase in the partial pressure of oxygen results in an increase in the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. But is this increase quick or slow?
slow. هو already مش ممكن كمان هو binded to oxygen كلها خلاص ولا لا ما ينفعش؟
Exactly, you are correct. The increase in the partial pressure of hemoglobin, it will slow down again. Why? Because the hemoglobin molecule is now saturated with oxygen. All the binding sites in the hemoglobin are filled with oxygen, and there is very little space available for more oxygen. Okay, Hossein?
Okay.
Good. So let me erase everything I have on this graph. So this graph, we will divide it into 3 parts. Part A, Part B, and Part C. In all the 3 parts, as there is an increase in the partial pressure of oxygen, there is also an increase in the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. But the rate will differ. In A, is it fast or slow?
Slow.
Yes, in A, it is slow. In B, it is fast or slow?
Fast.
Very good, it is very fast. In C, it is fast or slow?
Slow.
Slow, it will slow down again. So the rate will be different from A to B to C for different reasons. In A, why is it slow?
In A عشان أولاً ال partial pressure بتاع الأكسجين قليل.
Yes.
Hemoglobin finds it difficult to bind with the first oxygen عشان في حاجة في structure بتاع الهيموجلوبين.
Exactly, perfect. In B, why is it very fast?
عشان كان في slight increase في الأكسجين partial pressure بتاع الأكسجين.
Okay.
فناو عشان الهيموجلوبين binded with the first oxygen فit's now easier إن هو يbind with other oxygens اللي هو هيbind معاه.
Excellent.
The other 3 مش هو 4 maximum?
Yes, we are talking here about many hemoglobin molecules, not only one. But you're correct. The reasons you said are correct. Now, why in C does it slow down again?
عشان اسمه ايه partial pressure بتاع الأكسجين بتincrease صح؟
Yes, but why is the hemoglobin picking up oxygen very slowly?
عشان it's saturated.
Exactly, because the hemoglobin became saturated. It's filled with oxygen now, and all the binding sites are being used up. Easy?
Easy.
Yes, when you understand things, you discover that it is really so easy. This part of the graph, when the partial pressure of oxygen is very, very high, think about it. Where in the body you have lots of oxygen? In the lungs or in the respiring tissues?
في lungs.
Yes. So that part of the graph represents what is happening at the lungs. And the lower part of the graph, in which you have very little oxygen, represents the lungs or the respiring tissues, where in your body you have very little oxygen.
Respiring tissues.
Yes. Okay, see, the graph is really so simple and they get so many questions on it. If you don't understand it, you get confused. So this is the easiest way to read a graph. And this same graph, you can read it from right to left. Okay, if I am going to read it from left, excuse me, if I will read it from left to right, from left to right, then I am studying or reading how well the hemoglobin is picking up oxygen, how well the hemoglobin is loading oxygen. If I will move in the opposite direction, from right to left, then I am explaining or studying how well the hemoglobin is releasing oxygen. Let's do it together. Let's start from this part of the graph, from the upper right part. I have here very high partial pressure of oxygen, and the hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. And I am moving towards the left. So the partial pressure of oxygen is decreasing. As the partial pressure of oxygen is decreasing, what is happening to the percentage saturation of hemoglobin? Is it also decreasing or is it increasing?
Increasing.
If the oxygen is decreasing,
أي.
Don't look at this arrow. If the oxygen is decreasing, what is happening to the partial pressure of the hemoglobin? It is also
decreasing تاني.
decreasing. But the decrease here is fast or slow?
Slow.
Yes, it is very slow. See, when it is nearly horizontal, it will be very slow. Now the question is, why is the hemoglobin reluctantly releasing the oxygen? Is it easy to release the first oxygen molecule?
No.
No. Just like the hemoglobin finds it very difficult to bind to the first oxygen molecule, hemoglobin also finds it very difficult to release the first oxygen molecule. It is bound to the oxygen and it does not want to let go of the oxygen. To release the first oxygen molecule, it's very difficult. Okay?
Okay.
Fine. Now let's look at this part of the graph, Hossein. This part of the graph. In the middle part of the graph. This part of the graph is always very quick, whether in the picking up of oxygen or in the release of oxygen. So in this part of the graph, let's call it B. A small decrease in the partial pressure of oxygen results in a great decrease in the percentage saturation of hemoglobin. This means that as the oxygen is decreasing, the hemoglobin is quickly releasing it. Why? Why is the hemoglobin giving away the oxygen? It is giving it to who?
Respiring tissues.
Very good, because the respiring tissues need oxygen in respiration to make energy. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. Now in C, again, as the partial pressure of oxygen is decreasing, the percentage saturation of hemoglobin is also decreasing. But is it decreasing quickly or it slows down again?
Slows down.
It will slow down again. Why?
عشان الهيموجلوبين بقت unsaturated.
Yes. And the release of the last oxygen molecule is always very difficult. The hemoglobin has no oxygen. So it wants to hold on to whatever hemoglobin it has. It's finding it very difficult to release the last oxygen molecule. It wants it. That is why it will slow down again. Okay, Hossein? Hossein,
Okay.
are you with me? Look, I want you to understand a general rule that is really easy. That the relation between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen, they are directly proportional. In other words, as oxygen increases, hemoglobin will pick it up. The percentage saturation of hemoglobin will increase. hemoglobin affinity will what? Will also
increase.
So as the oxygen is increasing, the hemoglobin will bind with it. But the problem is, or the hard part is that this happens at different rates. The relation is not a straight line like you took in math. The relation is looking like this. At the beginning, it will be slow, and then it will be very fast, and then it will slow down again for the different reasons that we mentioned. In A, it is slow. Let me tell you where A is. In A, it is very slow because the partial pressure of the oxygen is very little because oxygen is not even available, and because binding of the hemoglobin to the first oxygen molecule is not easy. In B, it is very fast. The hemoglobin is quickly picking up oxygen, quickly. Why? Because now we have oxygen. It's available. And because the hemoglobin, after it bound to the first oxygen molecule and it changed in shape, binding with the remaining oxygen molecules becomes very easy. Are you with me, Hussein?
Yes.
In C, why does it slow down again?
عشان الهيموجلوبين بيت saturated.
Exactly. Okay, this is if we are reading the graph from left to right. And the same case if we are reading it from right to left. As the partial pressure of the oxygen is decreasing, the hemoglobin affinity will decrease, but it will decrease with different rates. It will be slow at first. C now will be A. It will be slow at first, and then it will increase in B, and then it will slow down again. In C, here this will be C. Clear, Hussein?
Clear.
Okay, understood? Because this graph, you don't memorize anything, you understand it. When you understand it, it becomes really easy. Fine?
Fine.
Okay, good. Now we said when we were talking about the transport of CO2, that the CO2, tell me the equation, it reacts with water mainly in the cytoplasm of the red blood cell to give you what?
H2CO3.
Yes, what is this called?
مش فاكر اسمها.
No, you should remember. Carbonic acid. You need to study harder. You need to study harder. In the presence of an enzyme, there is an enzyme that will catalyze this reaction. What's the name of this enzyme? Carbonic anhydrase. Ca is carbonic. Okay, Hussein? Carbonic what? Anhydrase. Now this carbonic acid will then continue the reaction. What will happen to it? This carbonic acid. What will happen to the carbonic acid?
هتخليها CH plus, صح?
Yes, it will dissociate into hydrogen plus and HCO3 minus. H plus, these are hydrogen ions and hydrogen carbonate ions. Okay, Hussein?
Okay.
Now, we are talking about hemoglobin and its affinity to different molecules. The hemoglobin, its affinity to different molecules is in this order. The hemoglobin, it will bind with what if these are available? If I have oxygen and CO2 and hydrogen ions and carbon monoxide, hemoglobin will prefer to bind with who?
Carbon monoxide?
Yes. So the affinity of hemoglobin to carbon monoxide comes first. And then it will prefer binding with who? What will it prefer to bind with? Huh?
H plus?
Yes. Because H plus will reduce the acidity of the blood and we don't want that. We want to prevent that. And what will be number 3?
Oxygen?
Yes. And the last will be?
CO2.
Yes. Okay, so this is really important. The affinity of hemoglobin to different molecules is exactly in this order. Fine. Now there is something called the Bohr shift. What is the Bohr shift? Okay, is this how we spell it, or this is how we spell it? The Bohr shift. The Bohr shift is the shifting of the graph of the oxygen dissociation curve. Either this curve will go up or will go down. Now, when does it go up and when does it go down? It will go up, Hussein, when there is a general increase in the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. So this is the original curve. The affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen increased. There is a general increase of the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. In other words, at every partial pressure of oxygen, hemoglobin will bind to more oxygen. Okay? So this will make the curve move up. This movement of the curve is called the Bohr shift. So what is the Bohr shift? Is the shifting of the curve up or down due to a change in the affinity of hemoglobin to what?
Oxygen.
To oxygen. Now, what will make the hemoglobin more affiliate, or what will make the affinity of hemoglobin increase? When you have more hemoglobin, when you have more oxygen or less oxygen? More. So the affinity of hemoglobin will generally increase towards oxygen when I have more oxygen and less CO2. This is one thing. Another thing that will make the affinity of hemoglobin increase towards oxygen is in fetal blood. Fetal blood. Fetal blood is the blood of the baby, the blood of the fetus. The blood of the baby, the hemoglobin in the blood of the baby has more affinity to oxygen than your hemoglobin. You have two types of hemoglobin. You have fetal hemoglobin and you have adult hemoglobin. The fetal hemoglobin likes oxygen more than the adult hemoglobin. Why? Because the fetus or the baby needs lots of oxygen because it needs to do lots of respiration, because it needs to grow. The adult hemoglobin does not need to do as much growing as the fetal hemoglobin. You understand, Hussein?
Yes.
Okay, so there are two types of hemoglobin. You have the fetal hemoglobin and you have the what?
Adult.
Adult hemoglobin. Which hemoglobin has a higher affinity to oxygen?
الفيت.
The fetal hemoglobin. So if we will draw two oxygen dissociation curves, both of them will look the same. We will draw one for the fetal hemoglobin and we will draw one for the adult hemoglobin. They will all look like this. But which one will be above the other? Which one will have more affinity to oxygen? The fetal or the adult?
الفيت هتكون up.
Yes, the fetal will be here, A, and the adult will be below it. The adult will be B. Why? Because fetal hemoglobin has more affinity to oxygen than adult hemoglobin. Clear? This is called the Bohr shift, the shifting of the curve either up or down. The curve will move up, indicating that there is a general increase in the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen in two reasons. Reason number one, in fetal hemoglobin. Reason number two, when there is more oxygen and less CO2. So when there is generally more oxygen, there will be generally an increase in the affinity of hemoglobin to oxygen. Is this clear?
الكويشن هيقول ايه تاني؟
The Bohr shift, or the shifting of the oxygen dissociation curve upwards, where will the, or when will the affinity of hemoglobin increase? In fetal hemoglobin, and when there is generally more oxygen in the atmosphere. If you live in a place that is not polluted, for example, and you have lots of oxygen in the atmosphere, your hemoglobin will be very happy and its affinity to oxygen will generally increase and the curve will shift upwards. This is called the Bohr shift. Is this clear, Hossein?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the curve can go up and it can go down. When can it go down? When the affinity decreases or increases? When it goes down. When the
Decrease.
hemoglobin affinity increase or decrease?
Decrease.
Yes, it's obvious here. Lower affinity. The hemoglobin doesn't like the oxygen. The hemoglobin is unloading, giving away the oxygen. Now, when does the affinity of the hemoglobin decrease? It decreases when there is no oxygen, when the partial pressure of oxygen in general decreases, when you are, for example, at the top of a mountain and the oxygen in the atmosphere is very low. So the hemoglobin affinity will be lowered. It will be lowered in adult hemoglobin, for example. It will be lowered while you are exercising and you don't have enough oxygen. It will be lowered when the blood is acidic. Okay, Hussein?
Reasons تاني, sorry.
Yes, let me explain this again. This is the original graph, the black one. This is the original graph. And now we know why it looks like this. Because the affinity at the beginning is slow, and then the affinity will be very high or very fast, and then it will slow down again. Is this clear?
Yes.
Now, the graph itself, all the graph can move up or down. This is called the Bohr effect. When will the graph move up? When the affinity for hemoglobin increases or decreases?
Increases, ودي عشان يا إما هو fetal hemoglobin أو البارشل بريشر بتاع الأكسجين عالي والكربون دايوكسيد أقل.
Exactly. And when will it decrease?
العكس, هيكون يا إما adult hemoglobin أو الكربون دايوكسيد فيها concentration أكتر من الأكسجين.
You are correct. The opposite reasons. Clear?
Clear. مش كان في أكتر من كده؟
Okay, these two reasons are enough.
Okay.
Okay, now we solved these in class. I don't know, where were you? Now, here is a summary to summarize the oxygen dissociation curve and the shifting. At the respiring tissues and at the lungs, don't forget that this part of the graph here represent at the lungs or at the tissues, the upper right part.
Lungs.
Yes, and this lower part represents at the lungs or the tissues.
Respiring tissues.
Yes, so let's read what is happening at the respiring tissues. CO2 is high. The hemoglobin will release the oxygen. The hemoglobin's affinity for the oxygen is reduced. Why? Because the hemoglobin will bind with the hydrogen ions, okay, to prevent blood acidity, because the hydrogen ions will make the blood acidic. We don't want that. And the dissociation curve will move up or down?
Down.
Down. This is known as the Bohr effect. Clear?
Clear.
At the lungs, the exact opposite will happen. You have high oxygen, hemoglobin affinity will increase. Hemoglobin affinity for the hydrogen ions will decrease. They're not even there. And the curve will move up or down?
Up.
Up. And this is also an example of the Bohr effect. So the Bohr effect or the Bohr shifting is when the curve moves up or down for different reasons. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. Any questions, Hussein?
No.
Okay, then all this is done. And then what is important? I'm sure you know what are the valves. This is important. There was a picture here. Where is it? Yeah, this picture is very important. You have here a valve. This is actually a valve between the atria and the ventricles. What is it called? Valves between the atria and the ventricles. What are they called?
Atrioventricular valves.
Yes. Okay. Now, when there is high pressure here in the ventricle, the valve will open or close?
Open.
There is high pressure in front of the valve here. The ventricle will contract.
Close.
Yes, this valve will close so that the blood does not move backwards. This valve will close so that the blood moves into the aorta and then go to the whole body. Okay? Are you with me?
Okay.
Now, when the ventricle contracts and the valve closes, there is a muscle here called the papillary muscle. This papillary muscle, it will contract. Now, why does it contract? To pull the tendons. Can you see those tendons?
Yes.
Okay. Now, why is this happening? So that the valve does not get inverted. It does not go inside out. Can you see that, Hosam? Can you see the picture?
I can see.
Okay. Do you understand what happens during contractions of the ventricles? This is the ventricle here. It will contract. This cusp will close. But what happens is that if it closes too hard, the flaps of those cups, they can invert. It can go inside out. To prevent that, the papillary muscle will contract to pull on those tendons so that the cusp closes, but without moving in the opposite direction, without inverting. Okay?
Okay.
Good. Now this is here a picture in an exam showing you A are the tendons that are connected to the papillary muscle. When the valve closes, the papillary muscle will contract, pulling on the tendons. And why does this happen?
To prevent inversion of the atrioventricular valves.
Very good. Okay, this is the answer that you just gave here.
اسم المصل ايه؟
Papillary muscle. It's written right there in your notes. Contraction of the papillary muscles attached to the valve by tendons prevents the atrioventricular valve from being forced inside out. Is it clear?
Clear.
Good. Now, I think you are very familiar with the atria and the ventricles. Which has thicker walls, atria or ventricles?
Ventricles.
Of course, because they pump blood to the whole body. So this Y is a ventricle or an atria?
Ventricle.
Yes, because you can see the muscular walls are very thick here. Good. Okay. Now, blood pressure. You have two types of pressure, something called the systolic blood pressure and the diastolic blood pressure. The blood pressure here, or the systolic blood pressure, it is the maximum pressure in your arteries. And the second pressure, the number that is at the bottom of the pressure number, you always have pressure. You have X over Y, a number above over a number below. The number above is the systolic blood pressure, which is the pressure in the arteries. Okay, when your heart is beating. And the number below, or Y, is called the diastolic blood pressure, and this is the pressure in your arteries also, but when your heart is relaxing, when it is resting between beats. Okay? So you have X and Y. Both of them is the pressure of the artery, but X when the artery or when the heart is contracting, and Y when the heart is relaxing. Okay, Hossein?
Okay.
Now, the two parts is the cardiac cycle and altitudes. Now, the cardiac cycle, you have to understand this graph really, really well. The cardiac cycle, Hussein, involves first, there are three parts. Number one, both atria will contract. And when both atria contract, this is called what?
Atrial systole.
Yes. When the atria are contracting, these valves, they're open or closed?
Open.
Yes, of course they're open. This is called the atrioventricular valve, and they're open so that the blood moves from the atria to the ventricles. Okay?
Okay.
Good. The second part of the cardiac cycle is the contraction of the ventricles, called the what?
Ventricular systole.
Yes. Now, the atrioventricular valves, while the ventricles are contracting, are open or closed.
بس ممكن حضرتك تبتدي من أول الفنتيكل سيستول عشان صوت حضرتك قطع.
When the ventricles are contracting, the atrioventricular valves are open or closed. What do you see?
closed عشان البلد ما يكونش black fluid ويروح للأيورتا.
Very good. So which valves are open?
Union are open.
Semilunar valve. Yes, the semilunar valves will open so that they enter the arteries. Very good. The last stage is when the heart relaxes. And this is called the what?
Diastole.
Diastole. The whole heart is relaxing. So the blood is here. Which valves will close to prevent the backflow of blood?
Semilunar.
Yes, the semilunar valves will close and the atrioventricular valves will be open so that the heart fills with blood again. Easy? So the cardiac cycle is made up of the atrial systole, followed by the ventricular systole, followed by the what?
Diastole.
Diastole. Now we want to plot a graph to show, yeah.
في الدايستول البلد بيكون موجودة في السيميليونر فالفز اللي فوق وبيروح داخل في الاتريا.
The blood is in the arteries and there is high pressure in the arteries. We don't want the blood to go back to the ventricles. So these semilunar valves will close. And as the heart is relaxing, it will start to fill up with new blood again that will enter the atria.
اللي فاتحين دول عند الاتريا اسمها ايه؟
These are valves found in this is the pulmonary vein and this is the superior vena cava.
Okay.
Okay. Now the graphs here, or this graph represents the cardiac cycle. And what do we have on the x-axis? We have time and we have the pressure changes in the left side of the heart. Okay. Now you have point A, point B, point C, and point D, and point E. And we want to know exactly what is happening. From A to B, what is contracting?
From A to B we contract papillary muscles. لا contracting بتاع
It is obvious here. What is contracting from A to B?
الاتريا.
The atria. So which valves are already open in the atrial systole?
Atrioventricular valves.
Yes. So from A to B, while the atria are contracting, the atrioventricular valves, they are already open so that blood moves from the atria to the ventricles. This is what is happening from A to B. The atria are contracting and the atrioventricular valve is already open. Okay, Hossein?
Okay.
Now at B is the start of the ventricular systole. So at B, the ventricles start to contract. When the ventricles start to contract, the atrioventricular valve at B will close or open?
Close.
Yes. The atrioventricular valve, it will shut so that the blood does not move backwards. From B to C, the pressure inside the ventricle is increasing. And at C, which valve will open?
Semilunar.
Excellent. The semilunar valve. Okay, so we are here. The semilunar valve will open. So the blood enters the arteries. At D, this is the start of the ventricular diastole. So which valve will open, which valve will close at D?
Semilunar.
Very good. The semilunar valve will close at D. Excellent. Okay, until the pressure decreases. At E, the atrioventricular valve will open at the end of the diastole. Let's look at this graph. Here, the atrioventricular valve will close. This is the beginning of the ventricular systole. And then the pressure will increase. Semilunar valve will open. And then the beginning of the diastole, semilunar valve will
close.
the pressure in the ventricles decrease, 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 and then the atrioventricular valve will open. It will stay open until the start of the atrial systole. You will start the cycle again. Is the graph clear?
Yes.
Good. Okay. What happens here? We have then the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle, Hussein, is just a list of things that you have to memorize. What happens in the cardiac cycle? How is
دي بتلخبط
huh?
بتلخبط من دي قوي.
Why? It's very easy. In order to study that part, you need to study the anatomy or the structure of the heart. See, this is a very nice diagram here that shows you the release of electric impulses. The impulses start at this point. This is called the sinoatrial node. It's a collection of nerve cells in the wall of the right atrium that releases electric impulses to make the heart contract. It's called the natural pacemaker.
سوري مسافة من الأول. Sorry.
Yes. If you notice the picture here, from that point, you have a release of electric impulses. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good. Now, the impulses that will make the heart contract, they are released from a collection of nerve cells known as the sinoatrial node. This sinoatrial node is found in the muscles in the walls of the right atrium here. It's found here. Can you see that? This is the sinoatrial node here. It's found in the wall of the right atrium. It will release electric impulses to make the heart contract. Is this heart?
No.
No. Now it releases impulses on its own. So they're called myogenic. Even while you're sleeping, the whole time, because if they stop working, you will die. So they will release impulses. These impulses, they will be released or they will cause the following. So the impulses will be released from the sinoatrial node and they will go and cause the contraction of both atria. Both atria will contract at the same time. If you notice the impulses, they come out of the sinoatrial node and they are released or they affect the atria. Both atria will contract at the same time. Is this heart? So you have sinoatrial node and then contraction. What's this? Contraction of both atria. Is it clear?
Here.
What happened? 1 minute. What is it? 1 minute or so. Something happened. Okay, and then what happens after both atria contract? Does the impulse go directly to the ventricles? Do the atria and the ventricles contract at the same time?
لا.
No. What happens is that the impulses, can you tell me, do you know?
Does it مش في حتة بتسلو داون الامبulses شوية؟
Exactly. So the impulses will travel from the sinoatrial node. It will cause contraction of both atria. And then it will go to another node called the atrioventricular node. Okay. This atrioventricular node is what will cause a delay in the impulses. It will cause the impulses to slow down a little bit. Why? So that the atria finishes contraction before the impulses go to the ventricles, so that the atria and the ventricles do not contract at the same time. After this delay, the impulse will be carried to that point. This is called the bundle of His that divides into two tissues. Can you see those two branching tissues?
Yes.
What are they called? Purkinje Hussam, where were you when we took it in class? It's called the Purkinje fibers. Were you absent?
في دي لا بس كنتش فاهمها.
Why didn't you ask me then? So you have impulses. First, they start here in the sinoatrial node. They will cause the contraction of both atria. And then they will go to number 2, atrioventricular node. That will cause a delay. It will delay or slow down the impulses a little bit so that they do not go directly to the ventricles. They go directly to who? To this point here called the bundle of His that will carry the impulses down these 2 branching fibers known as the Purkinje fibers that will carry the impulses to the base of the ventricle, and the impulse will start from the base upwards. Why does this happen? So that the ventricles, they both contract at the same time and they both start their contraction from the base upwards. So it is simply a series of events. The impulses in the heart, how do they travel? 1, they start from where?
It starts from the sinoatrial node بعدين when it sends the impulses both atria contract وبعدين بتروح للatrioventricular node
Yes.
بعدين it slows down الimpulses شوية عشان
Yes.
بعدين بتروح للbundle of His.
Yes.
Then it goes to the Purkinje fibers.
Very good.
Pulses go from the base upwards.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Simply a sequence of events. And why is this important? So that the atria, they contract before the ventricles. Because we don't want them to contract at the same time. So that the blood in the atria is emptied into the ventricles, and the ventricles contract after the atria. This is the cardiac sign. Okay? So you have number 1, sinoatrial node. Forget the annulus fibrosis, is not important. Sinoatrial node, both atria will contract, and then the atrioventricular node, bundle of His, Purkinje fibers, base of the ventricle, upwards.
مش الانولس fibrosis ده كانت non-conducting حاجة
Yes,
non-conducting.
this is the non-conducting tissue.
Okay.
Are conducting. Nice. Both the atrioventricular node and the bundle of His, they are found in the septum of the heart. Okay?
Okay.
Good. Now, what do we have here? The last thing is high altitudes. If you go to a mountain, if you go travel up a mountain suddenly, Hussam, you will be very sick because there is very little oxygen up a mountain and you will not be able to survive without oxygen. You will feel dizzy, you can vomit, you will be very tired, you will be very sick, and it can be fatal. But some people live on a mountain. How do they live on a mountain?
They are adapted to
Yes.
having وبيبقى عندهم الأكسجين أو الهيموجلوبين أعلى صح؟ الهيموجلوبين أعلى
Yes.
صح؟
Yes, they have more red blood cells and they have more hemoglobin. So altitude sickness, this is when you feel sick because you went up on a mountain suddenly. But if you were born there and you grew up on a mountain, your body will become adapted. What happens? Now we don't want to go fast. We want to know exactly what is altitude sickness. You feel breathless and your increasing rate will increase. You will be very dizzy and you will be very weak. And the arterioles in the brain will dilate. And this can cause a problem because this will increase the tissue fluid in the brain and this can cause edema. Okay, and this can be very, very dangerous. So much fluid will be accumulated in the brain. Now, hypoxia means what? Means little oxygen in the body. So how does the hypoxia occur at high altitudes? It's very easy. You will go up a mountain. This is you. You will go up a mountain and there will be little oxygen. So the hemoglobin will not find any oxygen to bind to. Its affinity to oxygen will decrease and the hemoglobin will start even releasing the small amounts of oxygen that are already present. So your body will have very little oxygen and you will feel sick. Okay?
Okay.
Now you're a baby and you were born there. So you are just fine. You became adapted. How did you become adapted? You have to memorize all those points. With time, your chest will be broader so that you carry more oxygen and your lungs will be bigger. You will have a bigger heart, okay? Especially the right side of the heart, because the right side of the heart will pump blood to the lungs so that it can pump more blood to the lungs every minute. You will have more hemoglobin. You will have more red blood cells. And this in biology is called the hematocrit value. You will have more red blood cells than a normal person because more RBCs means more hemoglobin, means more oxygen. You can bind to more oxygen, okay? You will breathe faster. Your breathing rate will be faster and deeper. Your heart rate will also be faster so that you pump more blood every contraction or with every heartbeat. Your heart will not only pump faster, but your heart will be stronger. It will pump blood with more force, increase in the power of heart contractions. So increase the cardiac output so that you can pump more blood with every contraction. Okay? More blood means more oxygenation. More capillaries, more capillary density. Your capillaries are very dense because capillaries, their function is the exchange of materials between the blood and the cells so that they provide more oxygen and they take away the waste products. You will have more mitochondria, okay, because you will need to do more aerobic respiration for all that. So children or human beings that live on top of a mountain, they are adapted. And the most important adaptation is that they have more red blood cells than average people. They have more hemoglobin than average people. This is called a higher hematocrit value, so that they carry more oxygen than average people. Okay, Hossein?
Okay.
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 Any questions? We explained now the whole lesson from A to Z. Is it all clear?
it's easy بس هحفظ الايكويشنز تاني وخلاص.
And the graphs and solve questions because the questions are very tricky.
Okay, I'll solve في class 5.
Yes. Okay. Best of luck. If you have any questions, again, send me.
اوكي اعتقد هو بس القلم التصفيات اللي كان معايا مشكلة فيها، التانيين انا كويس فيه ان شاء الله يعني.
What did you say?
انا في البيولوجي اس دي كان المشكلة الوحيدة اللي معايا اللي هو القلم ترانسبورت الماملز.
Okay, I'm going to send you now on WhatsApp the recordings for excretion and I want you to listen to them.
اوكي بتاعت O level صح؟ تمام.
Yes. The O
by the way
exam is before the AS, yeah?
it's in 7 days or 6 days or 8 days مش عارف.
Yes. Okay. You're ready?
I'm ready أيوة.
Did you study the supplement I sent you really well? Did it help?
Yes, it helped أيوة.
Okay. And how's your friend? You had a friend in year 11.
عمرو؟
Yes. How is he?
He's good.
He's studying? Did he?
He's studying
Huh?
studying دلوقتي ال A2 عشان it's right after biology O level يعني هو في 3rd of March 3rd of May.
Did he receive the supplement I sent on the group? Is he on the group?
عمرو isn't he عمر لا انا ما اعرفش.
Oh my God.
انا ما بكلموش عمر.
Okay, can you
Is
send
he not
it's in soft copy and it's downloadable. Send it to him as soon as possible, please, because I don't have his number.
in the group?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll send.
I think he's on Google Classroom and I did post it there, but send it to him and I want you to reply back telling me whether he knew about it or not.
Okay.
Okay, please, because I can't reach him.
Okay.
Okay, Hassan. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.